A seemingly ordinary day in global trade turned into a turning point that few saw coming. As a massive cargo ship neared China's eastern coastline carrying over 12,000 metric tons of pork, equivalent to roughly £26 million, the order came down: cancel the shipment. No public statement, no detailed justification, just a quiet but firm halt at the ports of Ningbo and Dalian. The message from Beijing was unmistakable: the era of predictable US-China agricultural trade is over. The cancellation, valued at over $35 million, stunned pork exporters across the United States. While disruptions in global trade are nothing new, the abruptness of this decision, and the volume involved, sent an unmistakable signal. This wasn't merely a logistical error or routine reshuffling. It was strategic, deliberate, and deeply political. At first glance, it might have seemed like a bureaucratic glitch or a customs hold-up. But within 48 hours, industry insiders and analysts began piecing together the bigger picture. What China had done was not only retaliatory, it was a microcosm of a broader paradigm shift in how Beijing is managing its food security and economic leverage. For US pork producers, particularly those in states like Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and North Carolina, this cancellation was catastrophic. The pork industry has long relied on exports to China to offset domestic oversupply. With consumption still strong in China, and African swine fever having devastated parts of the Chinese hog population in recent years, American farmers believed their products would remain indispensable. But that assumption, as it turns out, may no longer hold true. When the shipment was turned around or redirected to secondary markets at lower prices, it didn't just represent lost revenue. It exposed the vulnerabilities of American agricultural dependence on a trading partner that is no longer predictable. Industry groups were quick to respond. The National Pork Producers Council issued a terse statement expressing deep concern over what it called a politically motivated disruption of long-standing trade relations. Privately, executives and logistics coordinators scrambled to either reroute the pork to Japan, South Korea, or Mexico, or in some cases, store the product domestically, incurring significant refrigeration and warehousing costs. At processing plants across the Midwest, staffing was adjusted downward. In Iowa alone, 2 major plants announced temporary layoffs, citing unexpected inventory and market adjustment pressures. The roots of China's decision go deeper than just a single shipment. At the core of this cancellation lies a broader strategic realignment by Beijing, a recalibration of how it manages risk, food security, and geopolitical leverage in a volatile world. In 2023 and 2024, Chinese leadership made it clear through public speeches and policy papers that they intended to reduce reliance on food imports, particularly from geopolitical rivals like the United States. This rhetoric has now been transformed into action. Internally, China is scaling up its domestic pork industry. In Hebei, Shandong, and Sichuan, industrial-scale hog farming operations with biosecurity controls have expanded rapidly. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs has set ambitious targets to boost domestic production, improve feed conversion ratios, and even leverage gene editing technologies to create disease-resistant pigs. This is part of a larger national campaign to achieve what Chinese officials call agricultural independence, similar to the long-standing Made in China initiative in the technology sector. But self-sufficiency alone doesn't explain the timing or scale of the pork cancellation. To fully understand Beijing's thinking, one must zoom out to the broader geopolitical chessboard. Over the past 6 months, the United States has ramped up tariffs on a variety of Chinese goods, including electric vehicles, semiconductors, and renewable energy technologies. In public statements, President Donald Trump's administration has framed these moves as necessary to protect American industry and counter what it sees as China's unfair trade practices. Beijing, however, has been searching for less visible, but equally painful ways to retaliate. Rather than imposing tit-for-tat tariffs, which could further damage its own economy or escalate tensions, China has opted for more subtle forms of economic coercion. Cancelling a pork shipment already on the water doesn't make headlines like slapping tariffs on Tesla, but it sends a message to American farmers, lobbyists, and legislators: your agricultural exports are not guaranteed. Your leverage is not what it once was. This strategy of quiet retaliation also avoids direct confrontation in global forums like the World Trade Organization. By cancelling the shipment under vague terms like regulatory noncompliance or import quota adjustments, Beijing can maintain plausible deniability while achieving its objective. That objective is twofold: punish US exporters and reduce reliance on a trading relationship that it perceives as increasingly hostile and volatile. Meanwhile, China has been busy cultivating new partners. Brazil, already a major supplier of soybeans and beef to China, has seen its pork exports surge in the last year. Spanish pork producers have also increased shipments, benefiting from streamlined customs approvals and preferential trade terms negotiated in late 2024. While American producers have historically held a quality and scale advantage, the Chinese government appears willing to pay a premium, or absorb slight inefficiencies, to diversify its supply chain. It's also important to note the cultural dimension. In China, pork is not just a dietary staple, it's politically sensitive. Rising pork prices have, in the past, led to public discontent and even protests. The government's decision to build strategic pork reserves in underground cold storage facilities, often referred to as the pork stockpile, mirrors how the US handles petroleum. This stockpiling allows Beijing to absorb sudden disruptions, like this cancellation, without sparking domestic inflation or panic. The broader implications for US agriculture are profound. For decades, the American Midwest operated under the assumption that China would be a permanent, growing market for its commodities. That assumption now looks outdated. Whether it's pork, soybeans, corn, or wheat, American exporters face an increasingly uncertain future. The risks aren't just economic, they are structural and geopolitical. The cancellation also exposes the limits of American trade diplomacy. Despite numerous visits by US trade envoys to Beijing, and intense lobbying by agricultural groups in Washington, no amount of bilateral discussion appears able to shield US farmers from the fallout of macro-level tensions. In fact, some analysts suggest that agricultural exports are now a bargaining chip used by China to influence internal US politics, particularly in swing states, where rural voters can sway national elections. Domestically, the impact is already being felt beyond just pork producers. Feed grain markets, particularly soybean meal and corn used in hog diets, have experienced price fluctuations. Equipment dealers in rural America report a slowdown in purchases of tractors, harvesters, and grain storage units. Small-town banks that provide operating loans to farmers are tightening lending standards. In short, the economic ecosystem surrounding US agriculture is beginning to feel the tremors of what may become a prolonged trade Cold War. In Washington, reactions have been mixed. Some Republicans have accused China of weaponizing trade and called for retaliatory tariffs on Chinese food products, despite the fact that China exports very little food to the US. Others, including some Democrats, argue that this incident highlights the need for US agriculture to diversify its export markets and reduce dependence on any one country. But this story isn't just about trade imbalances or retaliatory politics. It reflects a deeper shift in global power dynamics. As China moves toward self-reliance in food, energy, and technology, the leverage that nations like the United States once held is slowly eroding. The pork cancellation is a symptom of that broader trend. One where interdependence is giving way to fragmentation, and where trade, once seen as a unifying force, is now a battlefield. For the average American farmer, the future now looks less certain. In the near term, some producers may be forced to scale down operations or seek alternative markets in Southeast Asia, Latin America, or the Middle East. But those markets are smaller, more competitive, and less predictable. For the long term, the US agricultural sector must confront an uncomfortable reality: the world is no longer guaranteed to buy what America grows. As Beijing continues to execute its food security strategy, including vertical integration of its agri-tech sector, increased mechanization, and investment in overseas farmland, it becomes clear that the days of China being a passive importer are over. Instead, China is now actively shaping global agricultural supply chains to serve its own strategic interests, not just economic ones. And so, that one cancellation in April 2025, $35 million worth of pork, turned away at the Chinese port, becomes more than a footnote. It's a flashing warning light for the future of US agriculture, a strategic play in the ongoing contest for economic dominance, and a quiet but forceful declaration from Beijing: we no longer need you as much as you think we do. For those watching trade routes, commodity prices, and geopolitical tremors, this may be the moment where global food diplomacy took a permanent turn. Not with tariffs or sanctions, but with a silent rejection slip, slipped into the inboxes of American exporters, as the ship turned quietly back to sea. And in that silence, a message was heard loud and clear.